Are we going to do a simultaneous sip in honor of the late Scott Adams? Cheers.
Oh.
That's good. All right.
I don't know the last time we talked. I should have looked it up, but I think it was
been a year.
Yeah. It was at least a year, probably a year and a half. Probably the fall with was it Dave? Or Aaron?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 It was last fall.
Anyways, I don't know how much the landscape has changed, but what are you focusing on? What's the most pressing issue that needs to be explained, expounded upon, and detailed?
So there's a lot that's been happening in the discourse on the political right. So to be quite frank, the elephant in the room is podcastistan. I am not convinced that quote unquote podcastistan, which seems to be people's terminology for the constellation of podcasters that revolve in and around Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly,
Dave Smith, Joe Rogan,
Dave Smith, Joe Rogan seems to be
Tim
like
Dillon,
Nick Fuentes,
Seth Dillon, but yeah,
Tim Dillon. Yeah. That whole sort of the group of people that some might want to put on under the rubric of the horseshoe. That whole group, I think they're far less important than people are giving them credit for. I actually don't think they move the needle. I think they're more chasing the needle. I don't think that Candace Owens is influencing popular opinion. I think she can raise some consternation on the right. And people say she's got a gigantic following. I don't know how much of that is located in any one country. And I'm not sure how much of that sort of huge following is people who take her seriously or people who are hate following for the drama. But she certainly isn't exercising any influence in what's going on in government, save for the occasional person who leaves government in a huff and is looking for a place to air their grievances. You see that quite a bit. I mean, Joe Kent's an example of that. But she's really not driving the narrative. She wishes she was. Well, I can't say that because I don't know her. But there's a lot of people that look to me like they're jockeying to be the next Charlie Kirk, or they would like that level of influence. And I don't think anybody has that level of influence. I think people are aspiring to it and aiming for it. I don't think they want to be him per se, but they want to have that level of prominence and influence and leadership. And I think that people have mistaken their online metrics for genuine influence in the real world. I don't think that they have that level of influence, and I don't think that they have. And if you just look at the most beautiful example is that constellation of people has been all in against the Iran thing and all in on the Jews and Israel and every aspect of that, right? I mean, the Jews is more Candace and Nick territory, but the other people are at least tolerant of that or curious about it or willing to let it slide in certain cases. We'll say it that way. But if you look at the actual normie voters, especially voters who say that they're MAGA, they're 95% on board with Trump. So I think podcastistan is a distraction. I've muted all of that on my timeline. Okay. All of those terms and words are muted. I just want those out because I don't see those as being. I see those as being immediate, not long term. Like I think the way like a nice way to say it is like Leah Thomas racing in those races against Riley Gaines was an immediate point, right? Women and girls sports is the bigger point. And the ideological superstructure which supports that is the long-term point. The critical, theoretical, postmodern sort of social justice ideologies that underguide that are the longer-term, bigger thing. The just immediate manifestation is that Leah Thomas is in this race. How Leah Thomas performs in that particular race isn't civilizational shifting, but the larger superstructure which allowed for it, that larger edifice, that is more concerning to me, right? At the highest level of abstraction, the underlying philosophy and, flow of culture is what actually matters.
Similarly, the prominence of Israel in modern dissident discourse owes to the fact that people on the higher level of analysis are tying our ties to Israel and its prominence in our extracurricular efforts abroad is owing to the post-war consensus. And that post-war consensus is rapidly losing prominence as a mythology, especially in the younger group. And there's evidence that people who honor Israel and who are Americans are becoming less and less savvy with how they facilitate dialogue around Israel. There's more and more shutting down of questions. The whole podcastistan thing came from Douglas Murray having a comically bad performance on Joe Rogan with Dave Smith, and then Konstantin Kisin, comes in and disparages everybody who's asking questions about Israel, who's performing in that debate. So there is a lot riding on Israel's influence, especially among the billionaire class in media, not so much the academy, but there is a preponderance of Jews in the higher echelons of America. And it's always going to be a question, to what degree does that influence our foreign policy? So I think that those questions should be open, but it's very easy to disparage that as anti-Semitic and to shut down the conversation and to relegate that outside of the Overton window, which is the same thing that the left has done with trans and race.
Sort of. Because I don't see those two things as being univocal. But I take the larger point that you're making there, that they would tie it to the larger point about the post-war consensus. I actually think it's maybe a nice place to start, because I actually don't think so. How do I do this? I think that a lot of what has happened on the political right, on the dissident right, is a rehash of the 1960s counterculture. And a lot of their conclusions are drawn from that rehash. And this has gotten me in trouble before, but I'm
interested to hear where you're going. This is a little bit more savvy than the whole woke right horseshoe theory, but it's a similar vein.
Woke right is James Lindsay's attempt to demarcate the distinction. No, to demarcate the political right in a way that singles out the use of people, or that singles out people who are, in his view, adopting in a similar epistemological framework to the left. Mm-hmm. Right? You've awakened, right? So if you think of, to use your schema there, the post-war consensus is the cultural hegemony, which we need to break and wake people up so that and so that's what James is pointing at. Mm-hmm. I get that framing. I understand it. But I think there's a little bit more work to be done about what's exactly happened here. So let's rewind a little bit, because we talk a lot about critical theory and postmodernism, but not a lot of people talk about the 60s counterculture. I've been banging on about this, by the way, for some time.
So let's do a refresher.
So we want to talk about the counterculture. In the 1960s, or following World War II, the people who talk about the post-war consensus tend to speak about something like liberalism, mm-hmm. right?
The international rules-based order, neoliberalism, neoconservatism are all
whatever you want to call that.
Yeah,
all
Western,
Anglo, that sphere
and ways of doing business,
of American hegemony throughout the world, whatever you want to call that. But they call that the post-war consensus. That was originally an odd term for me, because in Canada, in the Commonwealth, the post-war consensus refers to something in Britain, which is the agreed upon political consensus that emerged in Britain post-war that was broken by Margaret Thatcher. And it's largely considered that Margaret Thatcher in Britain broke the post-war consensus, and to a degree that Brian Mulroney broke the post-war consensus in Canada when he moved us away from sort of complete independence from the United States, which John Turner was arguing for, and moved us toward integration with our economies. That's what Brian Mulroney was doing on free trade. And if you go back, he won two huge majorities, and you had Canadians in the streets like holding up signs that said, "We want free trade now." So post-war consensus and the breaking away from the post-war consensus is in my view, something sort of like I'd always thought of that differently. So when the Americans were talking about post-war consensus, I had to kind of be like, what do they mean by it? And I think what they mean by it is a loose constellation of things, which include the counterculture, the civil rights movement, the rules-based international order, neoconservatism, neoliberalism, free trade. All of that stuff is part of the post-war consensus to them. Does that make sense? Am I stating the point clearly?
There's different levels of analysis, but yeah, it's all big jumbled bag of that you could loosely associate to a superstructure. But if you look at mythologies, if you look at nations, if you look at epochs, there is a rise and a fall of a narrative, and the narrative of World War II and everything that comes from that, economic, political, moral certitude, Americanism, in the phase between the 50s and current year is rapidly decaying on a number of different fronts.
Yeah. So
that's not a Marxist analysis or critical.
No.
It's not woke to just notice that things decay, nations rise and fall.
Well, I'm not making that claim. So but I want to back up and say something about liberalism first. So when you have the early forms of liberalism, you have that coming out of, say, like John Locke, John Stuart Mill, that sort of
enlightened woke.
The Enlightenment, which is basically the move towards rationalism of a certain kind, right? The reason it was called the Enlightenment is because it wasn't a critical awareness of superstructures. It was, we've discovered the scientific method and we've figured out how to illuminate the world in a certain way, right? Out of that flowed, if you follow like Kant, a view of autonomy and rights. Okay, so Kant's going to view people as autonomous persons, right? Much more than as group members, right? I am really oversimplifying. So if somebody wants to say, well, technically Kant said, Don't
worry about that. Go forward. Don't worry about it.
But the autonomy of persons is a view that comes out of, if you read Locke and Kant and John Stuart Mill and Berkeley and Leibniz, like that view just falls out of all of those guys. Then, I just want to pull something up here.
Don't get lost in the reference weeds, Wokal. I want to have a conversation.
Yeah,
and
I know. I just want to make sure. Okay. Let me just pull that back up. I just want to make sure that I get all my ducks in a row. Okay. So out of that, you get sort of the early Enlightenment and the early form of American liberalism, right?
Founding Father stuff.
Yes, the Founding Fathers, the failed French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Scottish Enlightenment, all of that is happening.
An intentionally designed state.
Yes, a designed constitution. Whereas the British Constitution evolved slowly, the American Constitution was an attempt at a full redesign. So you could think of the British Constitution as being, say, the man that evolved from an ape, right? The democracy that evolved from a monarchy. And the American Constitution would have been more like, we see that plane over there. We've done an analysis of that plane. Now we're going to build a new plane, right? It's intentionally designed. Okay. So that runs for 100, 150 years, whatever it is. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, by the time Marx shows up, liberalism starts to get into real trouble. And the reason that it gets into real trouble, and I'm going to lean on, I hope my sort of influences here are clear. I'm leaning a lot on John Searle and Joe Heath for this analysis, and Arthur Malwork and some others. But if you look at, say, like Eldon Eisnock writing about progressives in the early 20th century, they're really being explicit about trying to create a new progressive order. And you have to ask yourself kind of like, why? Why were the progressives of the early 20th century doing that? And the answer is because, yes, that's exactly who I'm talking about.
Yeah,
that whole constellation.
The state.
Yeah. Why are we modernizing liberalism? Well, the answer is because if you look at the original American Constitution and the liberals as they were, the way they dealt with the problem of human autonomy, or the question of human autonomy, is to say, how do you prevent the state from overly reaching its claws into the lives of its people? How do you establish the autonomous person? And their answer was, you have a public-private distinction. And the private distinction is a private property and what a man is entitled to according to his rights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? He's got his own property on which he can say what he wants and do what he wants, right? There's your free speech. He can own a gun to protect himself. The Fourth Amendment against having to quarter people, right? All of that, sort of against unreasonable search and seizure as well. Yeah. I think that's the Fifth Amendment. All of that is to what? Yeah, to protect the individual from the state and create his autonomous space. Mm-hmm. But that original sort of liberalism, and for a long time, that kept the hand of the state at bay. And that kind of swept through the West, particularly in America, but everywhere. That view started to pick up, but it had some problems. And the best way to think to see the problem of it is to see the places in which Nazism and communism began to rise in the early part of the 20th century. And what it turns out, like, why did those things happen? I mean, like, if this sort of Enlightenment liberalism is all it's cracked up to be, why is it in the early part of the 20th century that in well-advanced European nations, fascism and communism, like the Weimar Republic, is showing up? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Mm-hmm. Why does Marx take off? I mean, particularly after his death, he really goes bonkers. Why? And the answer to that turns out to be that as great as an advancement as that Enlightenment liberalism was, it comes with it's limited in its capacity to deal with certain important social problems that people think that the government needs to deal with. So I'll give you an example of where communism and fascism both get a foothold in a liberal world. Okay. Suppose you are in, say, it's the 1910s, right? Or better yet, the 1930s, and there's a run on a bank in your city, mm-hmm. and the bank collapses. All of the contracts that the bank insures become voided. All of the loans get recalled, and you get a massive amount of businesses collapsing who can't pay their workers. You're in a city of 1 million people, and overnight, 100,000 men between the ages of 20 and 50 are now unemployed. Okay? If you're an Enlightenment liberal, 100,000 men can't feed their families. As an Enlightenment liberal, what you say is, yes. Well, you have to figure it out for yourselves. That's not the role of government. Right? Like, you're just done. That's just all you can do. Because the economic sphere is completely outside of government. So you can't do anything about that. There's nothing that you can do other than oversee the orderly distribution of the bankrupt companies and those assets according to whatever debt people can, that the first people to get paid out, and that's all you can do. You can investigate for fraud, but that's it. Now, if you're aware of human nature, even in the slightest, 100,000 men between the ages of 20 and 50 who can't feed their families turns into a revolution very quickly. Right? Like, we can't feed our families. Nothing we can do about that. That situation persists for a couple of weeks before people start thinking, we need to overthrow something here. Right? Like, what are we going to do? If you can't resolve that quickly, it's a problem, man. Mm-hmm. And so it comes to be realized that there's a whole lot of things that go on that are like that, which sort of Enlightenment liberalism just can't account for. Right? It just has nothing to say about, say, if the money supply gets constricted and you get a deflationary spiral, or if you get a series of bank runs, or a domino effect of collapsing banks because there's one bank run, and then all the other banks panic. It had nothing to say about when a bank collapses, what happens to people's deposits. Unemployment insurance. Nope. Employment insurance. Nope. None of those things have a role. All of that is relegated to the private sphere. I mean, if you really look at the really tough libertarians, they would even say things like, delivering the mail and even sometimes the building of roads should be relegated to the private sphere. The government just has no place in that. Well, when you have 100,000 people out of work in a city, like when 10% of your population is out of work, that turns into a riot pretty quick.
It depends on the people, though. It really depends on the people. I mean, because you assume that they want to overthrow things. There's plenty of cultures that the first thing to do is to have a revolution. There's other cultures that have facilitated, the culture that facilitated liberalism, Anglo, Protestant, folk, probably some crypto Jews or Jews, are self-starters. They assume a lot about human nature that is true about their nature and is not necessarily true about other natures.
Yeah, but look at what happened in, say, Germany. Yeah, that's true. That's why I'm saying it's not immediate. I mean, you've got a few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Until the kids start going hungry, right? Those people will try to find jobs and try to create businesses, and they'll do that. But if that persists long enough, you will get a revolution and a revolt. It probably takes longer, say, in Germany than it might in, say,
Zimbabwe,
Vietnam or something, or whatever it is. But or Cambodia, the killing fields, right? Or Cuba. Right? It might take longer in Germany, but it will show up. Okay. And it did show up in the Weimar Republic. Okay? Because if you allow that to persist for long enough, you do need a governmental solution that has enough power to facilitate the organized clearing of the market. Like, that just needs to happen. And what are we going to do in the meantime to make sure that people can be fed until we figure out how to reorganize the system, reboot it and get it up and running? But classical liberalism has no place for that. So what you see is the rise of communism and fascism as rivals to liberalism in the early part of the 20th century, particularly in Germany. The Weimar Republic is like a perfect example of this. Okay? And you even see, I mean, in the Great Depression in the United States, FDR's New Deal, that radical transformation of liberalism, the adoption of so much of the progressive program from the early 1900s, Eldon Eisnock sort of documents this beautifully. Can't remember the name of the book. We won't go in the weeds of citations, but you can see that they're legitimately trying to build the literature and the justifications for doing this, because they see that this old Enlightenment liberalism has problems that are just, it can't patch, it can't fix. And so liberalism's already being weakened, right? Or that there's problems in liberalism that are perceived as not being fixable.
Yeah, or there's an opportunity within a particular place in a particular time for those who are leading government to expand government. And those are great justifications.
But what opens up the door for them to do that, right? Well, certain economic things that the government can't fix, and they say, hey, the government can fix this, right? That's going to give you your opportunity. So it's all of a piece there, right?
Yeah, okay.
So fascism and communism really get going. And then the United States absolutely dog walks both of them. First in World War II, where the United States just said, look at what our manufacturing base can produce. Wow, look at what our scientists can make. And they just, I mean, people talk about like
from
the Nazi
Germany, but anyways.
no, I'm saying like who got the atomic bomb first? That's what I mean. The demonstration of power.
Yeah.
The demonstration of American power and technology. I mean, the Germans had great scientists, but they weren't able to do what the Americans were. And what the Americans were basically saying is, our system kicked your system's ass, and that they did.
Okay.
And the Americans, I can't remember who was telling me this. There was guys Americans who had for whatever reasons, wound up within, I think, maybe 100 miles or 10 miles or something of Moscow. And the information was relayed back that said, we just took out the Germans. We could take out the communists too, like right now. And they thought about it. Mm-hmm. They didn't, but they could have.
Why not?
And so
one wonders.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they just didn't have the thirst for war at that point. Mm-hmm. I mean, it had been pretty bloody and brutal.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So the sort of American liberal program, there was still a lot of dissatisfaction with it, but it maintained itself by its dominance in World War II, because the Americans shifted the whole balance of that war rather significantly. And by the time...
you could say that Russia did quite a lot to stomp Germany too. That's why they won half of the world. Well, not Russia, but the Soviets, rather.
The Soviets, I'm not going to say that the Soviets didn't put significant manpower, but the Soviets were able to do what they were able to do because of their sheer size of their manpower that they were able to put right onto the front lines. Yep. Whereas the Americans were just like, look at what our economic and our military might comes from our ability to manufacture and build. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look at how fast we can build jeeps and tanks and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And in an all-out war with the Soviets at that time, it wouldn't have been close.
Does what's the role of liberalism in that level of cooperative productivity?
Well, so basically what the Americans had done is said, the manufacturing base that's created by our liberal capitalism is superior to everyone else's. And we have the largest, most fierce fighting force with the best technology, and we dropped the bomb. That basically stomped out fascism. And that left communism.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for the sake of argument, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but what do you mean by fascism?
Well, the Nazis. The Nazis and to a lesser extent the Italians, that fascist Nazi regime, right, which was served as a rival to both liberalism and communism.
Well, yeah, I don't want to. The Nazis distinct. I mean, just if you just break it down, it's just like an ethnic solidarity, a country that is by and for and of its own people, and the government puts its own people before everything, and then starts weeding out what causes a person to be on our side or not.
It's also government authoritarianism throughout the economy as well.
Okay.
Also governmental authoritarianism with respect to what people are allowed to say. It's the in the decrease of autonomy. All of that feeds into it, right?
Okay, cool.
So that just gets its ass kicked, and then it leaves the communists, and they, stayed around. Give them credit, stayed around a little longer. But what happened? The Soviet Union crumbled, and it broke apart from within, and that left America. And that's the story I just laid out for you is like a little bit of a common story, but there's something else that's going along in there, is that the critiques of liberalism that occurred in the 30s and the 40s leading up into World War II didn't just go away. Mm-hmm. They hung around. And the answer to those critiques comes through John Rawls and Rawlsian liberalism, which is different from Enlightenment liberalism. Mm-hmm. Okay?
The basically the Schrodinger's cat, where you're just in a box, and if you wanted to have any life, right? Could you just distill it down? There's this Rawlsian thought experiment that I think illustrates the spirit.
We're gonna get to that in a second, but I want to kind of bracket that, okay? But before Rawls shows up, mm-hmm. by the people had already seen the disaster of the Nazi fascist regime, so that kind of poisoned that well. But also by the time the 50s and the 40s had rolled around, even prior to World War II, but certainly after it, people became very aware of the problems with the Soviet Union. And so there were leftists who were trying to disassociate themselves from communist and from Soviet communism. Okay? And before we get to Rawls, because we're going to get to him, I just want to stop there post-World War II. Okay? The writing is kind of on the wall for the Soviet Union at that point. It still had to play itself out, but the United States was clearly economically superior to the Soviets at that time. They were militarily superior to the Soviets. The Soviets did have a lot of nuclear weapons, but it was quite clear that the United States was winning the battle in terms of who's providing a better life for its people. Even in the 50s and 60s, this was clear. And it was clear that the United States provided more freedom to almost everybody. There was Soviet defenders, but they were fewer and fewer and fewer and further between, right? By the 60s and 70s, it was basically a small group. It was mostly dissident academic types and hard leftists. But within American society and within the world at large, people saw America as being the greatest of the great powers, we'll put it that way. Okay, the United States is clearly a world hegemon even at that point. By the time Yuri Andropov comes into power, I believe in 1979, the Soviet Union's already breaking apart, right? He's a desperate last move to bring in somebody from the KGB into the Politburo, which they never would have done previously. So this is kind of last ditch, right? It's already weakening. And so people in the 60s, leftist theoreticians in the 60s, still looked at American capitalist society with the same sort of critical eye that they had been doing in like the 20s and 30s and 40s, pre-World War II. That didn't just go away. What did go away was, okay, we can't do communism. That's not working out well with its gulags, and we hate fascism for obvious reasons. So, but that critique of liberalism stuck around. And I think that after World War II, a bunch of liberals just looked around and said, ha, we won. It's over. And it wasn't, because what you'd done is showed that, yeah, we're still stronger than those other guys, but you hadn't dealt with the criticisms, right? The economic criticisms in particular. Hey, when 10% of your country becomes unemployed, what do you do? When a bunch of people go broke, when there's a Great Depression, when there's a famine, when those things happen, capitalism, the criticism goes that liberalism doesn't have an answer to those things. That's the claim. And the progressives of that era, who were engaged in the New Deal, were attempting to answer that with the New Deal and say, hey, we can do this New Deal thing, and then we're going to preserve sort of the American experiment by progressivizing it, right? We're going to bring it into progressivism.
Defined as what? Like soft communism or liberalism plus?
Welfare state liberalism.
Welfare state liberalism. Okay.
Yeah. So that's
so we're gonna take from the rich and give to the poor.
No, we're going to create a series of. That wasn't how they were thinking of it. They were thinking of it as we're going to create a series of social safety nets to deal with what happens when 10% of your population becomes unemployed. That's all they saw themselves as doing, right? Okay. They're saying, look, we're going to keep all this other stuff. The libertarians of that era were saying, how are you going to build that social safety now without fundamentally changing the relationship between people and their government and without challenging property rights at a fundamental level? That was the libertarian criticism, right? So that dialogue is going on. On the left, and this is where we're going to tie it in to the right in just a second. That sort of post-war consensus back in the 50s was already fragmenting between sort of New Deal Democrats and conservatives and libertarians who were kind of like, you're changing the fundamental relationship of man and the state with your New Deal. So that was already happening. So the post-war consensus was, communism's gone, socialism's gone, fascism and Nazism are gone, but we're broadly
liberalism needs an update.
Yeah, but we can do, and at the time, are we going to get off the gold standard was kind of like the big question. Should the government be insuring deposits, right? That sort of thing. Should there be government housing was the real question. Or how much are we changing man's relationship? Okay. Man's relationship to government. How much are we doing it? Okay. The political left at that time looked around and said, so now we have to talk about the culture that comes out of World War II. So I've kind of sketched out the political story. It's been told a bazillion times. I'm sure I'm not the first. I've just sketched that out. Now I want to tell you the cultural story and how the cultural becomes sort of political. Coming out of World War II, everyone comes home in 1945, right? And when everybody comes home in 1945, well, they don't all come home like exactly that year, but over a period of about somewhere between 1945 and 1944, 1946. What you find is, what would you say? People really don't want. People just want to go back to normal. They've just been through a huge war. They've just been through this massive fight. They just want to go to normal. Okay? And at that same moment, you're having the proliferation of large corporations and large entities, right? Because the way the economy is advancing. And that's leading to larger bureaucracy. At that same time, you get mass production showing up in a really big way. I mean, it had existed before, but now it's really getting going due to things in technology. And what's the result of that? Life becomes more bureaucratic, right? People don't want to rock the boat, so everyone is just living that sort of uptight Protestant life. People just want to be left alone. Everyone just wants things to go back to normal, right? There's not a lot of risk taking, especially culturally. And you have mass production of goods. And so what you have then is the mass production of goods is creating a whole pot. Instead of each person having like boutique things made by a local craftsman, you have large sort of factories just pumping out the exact same shoes and the exact same jeans and the exact same shirts and exact same jackets and exact same suits and exact same dresses for everybody. It's the mass production. So you don't have like this big, broad sort of chiaroscuro of artisan manufacturers and handmade goods that you might have had in the 1800s. It's just stamping out white T-shirts and stamping out gray suits and stamping out, trad wife dresses, right? And we're producing cars, and all the cars are stamped out and look the same, right? And the televisions are rolling off, and all the TVs look the same. And at that time, you have the Levittown houses that are showing up, right? And all the houses look the same. And so you get this entire society where at the time, people are saying like, comedians used to tell the joke that you could have a man, he would leave from his job and he would go to the wrong car, then drive to the wrong neighborhood, get into the wrong house, make love to the wrong wife, kiss the wrong children goodnight, and not know the difference because everything looks the same. And so this idea was that it was conformity, right? It's if you've ever seen like The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit or American Beauty, they all satirize this sort of thing beautifully, right? Everyone is just being a conformist. So in the 1960s, I'm going to quote a song for you here from the 1960s. Malvina Reynolds had a house called Little Boxes, and she says, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes all the same. A pink one, a green one, a blue one, a yellow one. They're all made of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. All the people in the houses all went to university where they were all put in boxes and they all came out all the same. There's doctors and lawyers, executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. They all play their golf and drink their martinis dry. They all have pretty children that go to school, and the children go to summer camp and then to university where they are all put in boxes and they all look just the same. Okay? That song would go on to be used. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. You have the Beatles at that time, I'll fast forward to Canada in 2000. That same sentiment. I don't want to waste my time becoming another casualty of society. I'll never fall in line, become a victim of your conformity, and back down. It's the same sentiment, just spoken a little differently. And so this idea is everyone looks at all of this bureaucratization, the organization of social life, the way that everyone's dressed the same, the mass production, and they think this is all just conformity, right? Everyone's a conformist. And so the leftists at this time...
Why would that be an issue? Like, that's a modern way of looking at things. But was it too uniform?
It was in the 1950s and 60s. Leftists looked at that and began to theorize that there had been, and you can find this in Vance Packard's book, The Hidden Persuaders, that there had been again, we have to think of it from the perspective of socialists and Marxists who are trying to attack capitalism after communism gets knocked out. So they're critiquing capitalism. And their view is that all of this conformity is what is maintaining the system. That this conformity is being constructed and created by the system in order to reinforce its own legitimacy. And so their theory was that there had been a crisis in overproduction. Capitalism produces goods at such a high rate that in order to keep the whole thing going, you need people to buy. And the only way you get people buying is through advertisements. Now, people are naturally going to want variety. And the only way to ensure that they buy the mass-produced products is to use advertising and propaganda and mass media to shape their tastes. Okay? That's the theory. So, again, Vance Packard, Hidden Persuaders. You can find elements of this in Theodore Roszak's The Making of a Counterculture, Charles Reich in The Greening of America, the Stuart Ewan's Captains of Consciousness, all of that. And so the counterculture at that time is essentially arguing that the conformity of American life is what is maintaining the system. It's a sort of quasi-Rousseauian view that man is born free, but everywhere is in chains. And so the idea is that all of American life is drab conformity that is imposed on people, that it's crushing their individuality, breaking their creativity, ripping apart and destroying authenticity, and replacing it with a series of propagandistic platitudes and ideas that have been sold back to us. Right? They've taken all of our ideas of, say, like American freedom and the desire for prosperity, commodified the whole world and sold it back to us as products, as consumerism. And so that's the underlying theory and the critique. Running parallel with that critique, right? So you can see the basic outlines of this throughout all manner of 60s counterculture effort. The idea or counterculture thinking is that capitalism is obviously a horrible system. Why does everybody continue to buy into it? Well, because there's a system of conformity that forms people into good little conformists. It turns them into cogs in the machine that will just keep the wheels of capitalism churning.
Yeah.
Okay. Running alongside that is the Gramscian view of cultural hegemony. And in the Gramscian view of cultural hegemony, the entire culture is sort of used as a system of is sort of used as an apparatus which has as its purpose the transmission of ruling class and elite ideology, as Marx would have it, right? Okay. So this Marxist idea of ideology, that ideology is essentially a set of false narratives or false beliefs that are used to justify an essentially oppressive set of practices, that idea. So Gramsci takes ideology and says ideology isn't just that. Ideology isn't just a set of ideas that gets taught, by the ruling class. Ideology is actually built into the culture itself. And in the 1950s and 60s, theoreticians at that time said, actually, it's far more insidious and widespread and pervasive than you even knew, Marx and Gramsci. It's actually built into such things as language. It's built into the structure of society. It's built into it is saturating our society through mass media, propaganda, and advertising. Okay. So what their theory is that all this mass media and advertising and propaganda saturates the culture, and it turns people into good little unthinking conformists that just buy, consume product, as it were, and just take our mass-produced goods that all look the same. Until we come out with the next series of mass-produced goods which all look the same, then they get rid of the old ones and buy the new ones. That's the theory of planned obsolescence, right?
That whole theory just sounds like some well-to-do, affluent kid searching for something to rebel against because life's too easy for him. Like, I just don't buy it at this point.
As it turns out, all of the artists who are pushing this stuff tend to be from very, very wealthy families who have given, and they've all studied at the finest universities, right? The Conquest of Cool, that was Thomas Frank's book. They're all from very well-to-do universities. So if you look at like the people that were pushing it, like Theodore Roszak and Charles Reich and Stuart, these are all well-to-do guys, very, very well educated. If you look at the people who were many of the sort of foremost artists came from wealthy homes. They were well trained. They were upper middle class. Like the Rolling Stones had this like sort of working class edge to them, right? Really rebellious, but they came from like 2-parent homes, right? They were really happy guys from 2-parent homes. They were doing well for themselves. A lot of those artists were, and the counterculture of the 60s really emerges out of the student movement it emerges in artistic spaces and out of sort of places where well-to-do educated elites are gathered. That's their view. Now, you've kind of foreshadowed my opinion, which is that people were not brainwashed into liking mass-produced goods. People were induced to like mass-produced goods because, my goodness, they're cheap. I can afford a shirt, and I can afford a house, and I can have a toaster. And when the cultural critic shows up and says, oh, yes, but you all have the same toaster, and you all have the same refrigerator, and this is inducing in you a sort of conformist way of thinking. The average person looks at him and goes, dude, I just want to make toast. Right? Yeah. But that idea begins to take root. And in the 60s, particularly coming out of the 60s, you start to see that cultural mythology take off, right? That the whole culture at large is brainwashing us. It's sapping us of our creative luster.
Tune in, drop out, the Learys, awaken to,
That's right. It's proto-woke. Okay, it's proto-woke, right? That's the counterculture. And so out of the counterculture, there's a few things that emerge. There's a particular way of doing politics, and you see it from the counterculture right up into woke. And so the first idea is that it comes basically out of the situationists and Guy Debord, which is the smallest and that actions with the smallest and most ephemeral of origins have eventually disrupted the order of the world. Okay? Yeah. So what you have to do is everyone's been sort of brainwashed by the system, and so you have to make them aware of that. And so what you're going to do is you're going to engage in cultural politics. Okay? And the goal is
Kool-Aid acid test stuff.
Yes. So men are going to wear earrings and grow beards, and we're going to engage in performative nonconformity as a way of showing people that we're not trapped in the system. Okay? And showing people that you actually don't have to do this. Right? We're going to pull back the curtain on the Matrix a little bit, right? It's the woman in the red dress in the Matrix, right? Who shows you that it's not real. Yeah, we're looking for that.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what they're doing. It's cultural, right? The question that those 60s Marxists and critical theorists were trying to answer is, given that capitalism is obviously a horrible oppressive structure, why do people continue to believe it? It never occurred to them that people actually like this. That the urge to have a huge diversity of different products and have all the houses look different and everyone dressed different, like that's really appealing to an artist. But to the average person, if everyone walks around in a gray flannel suit, that's fine. right? Like the critique of the organization man must hit so hard if you're a 1960s beatnik. But if you're a guy who's like, I get affordable suits and packs of white shirts for $5 and I get to go to work and come home, hey man, that's great. Right? Like they just love that.
Yeah.
So I just want to get up to take the temperature of the room, so to speak, for a minute, like, do you see where I'm coming from with this? Is this making sense?
Yeah, I still don't know where you're going.
Okay. So, are
we going to land in podcastistan, you think? Or the DR? I mean, because the
we are.
You want to go Yarvin,
so
neo-reactionary land?
Here's where we're going to go.
Spandrel?
What I see is happening is if you look at the countercultural politics, it was always about culture. And Charles Reich, I wish I had the book with me, I don't, actually says in one of his books, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, that it's the machine, the system follows the culture. It has no choice. So if the culture changes, the machine has no choice but to comply. Mm-hmm. And so there will be a cultural revolution that will change the political system as its final act. The culture changes everything. And so what you do is you engage in, so there's have you seen the Monty Python? The violence inherent into the system, right? Have you seen that skit? Okay. Mm-hmm. You do that in real life. I mean, that skit was made because people were going around doing that, right? So what you do is you engage in sort of intentionally offensive protest and provocations, right? Free love, or women like burn their bras. And the goal is you want to do this to get the social forces to stamp down. And then you say, look, I'm oppressed. And the goal is to reveal the bars on the cage that people didn't know were there, right? Mm-hmm. Or to make deliberately offensive movies and films and whatever else to reveal to people the bars on the cage.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's this sort of provocative cultural activism in lieu of attempts at real legislation. This is why I think that people have to separate like the counterculture out and the critical theorists away from, say, the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement could be seen as an authentic expression of, say, neoliberalism. But the counterculture, many of the countercultural theorists of the day looked at the civil rights movement and said, this is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, because it still accepts the fundamental logic of the oppressive system. Okay? Mm-hmm. I think that is happening on the right. There's been this idea that's increasing on the right that says politics is downstream of culture. Maybe I should wrap this up with one more point. Do you know who Chase Strangio is?
Yes.
The trans lawyer who argued the Scarametti case, the one who said the circulation of Abigail Shire's book, like the stopping of that was like a hill that they were going to die on. Mm-hmm. She would die on. This is going to be the countercultural idea just updated with postmodernism. My work will make an impact on people's lives and we're just going to keep fighting. Maybe it will make us feel less zombie-like at times. What I tell myself every day is that the confusing, unsettling nature of transness for other people is the thing that will spark the revolution we need. It's the uncertainty, the in-betweenness, the transversing of binaries that we offer that's going to destabilize the whole thing. That's what they're scared of, and they're right.
When did she write that?
That is from...
was that in court?
No, that is in an interview in April 22 of 2025 in Cultured magazine.
Okay.
That's the countercultural idea. It's right there. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you can see this adopted by like Kurt Cobain, right? In his diaries, he talks about rotting the system from within. He's bought into it. Naomi Klein in No Logo, Calais Lawson in a Culture Jam, Alyssa Quart, and the buying and selling of teenagers. All of these people are just, it's just the second round of the counterculture, right? It's just the reanimation of it. And in the same way that the 60s counterculture theorists thought like the mass advertising and propaganda is brainwashing people into conformity. Now you have people like Robin DiAngelo saying that it's the consistent messaging from the culture socially conditions people into being a racist. And you have to be trained to see it. Yeah. In the same way in the 60s, you had to be trained to wake up. So that view is being adopted by certain countercultural theorists on the right. And I think this has deep resonance in the DR. And the idea is that, so you see this start to show up maybe 8 or 9 years ago is when it really started. And I think the person who kicks it off in its most explicit form is probably Steve Bannon, or maybe somebody like Andrew Breitbart, who said politics is downstream of culture.
Okay.
And what they were reacting to at that time was the inability of themselves of, I mean, conservatives could win elections. Reagan won elections. George H.W. Bush won elections. I mean, between 1980 and 2008, Republicans won all but 2 elections. They won 5 of 7 elections. And yet, everything just kept moving to the left.
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out why. And their solution was, it's because the left controls the culture. And because the left controls the culture, they can just, the politics has to follow from it. Okay? Now, there's not that that's entirely wrong. There is a connection between culture and politics. I'm not denying that. But what came out of that observation was this idea that conservative governments don't deliver because conservative governments are either brainwashed by the system on the one hand, or that the masses have been brainwashed so that even when conservative governments get in, the outcry from actually ever doing anything conservative would be so great that it actually fences in and limits what they can do.
Okay.
Okay. So what's the answer to this? Well, you can start to see it in a certain form of cultural activism that shows up on the political right. At a certain point, they began to run this campaign where they would put posters up that say, I'm trying to think of a good example of it.
It's okay to be white? Is that where you're going?
That's one of them. It's okay to be white. Okay. But another one is the beginning to intentionally put people in positions to offend in order to show the reaction. This is the triggering of the SJWs, right?
Yeah.
And the triggering of the SJWs follows a very similar logic of the counterculture. And the idea is you go into your classroom or you go into some public event and you say the thing that no one wants you to say.
Oh, to do the Groyper thing.
Yeah, you do the Groyper. And then the outcry comes against you. Look at what you've done. And you say, look, people, look at where the Overton window is. Look at the bars on the cage.
Well,
look at how you're being controlled. Now, maybe, hold on. I know okay. it's not this. Just let me
just
go
being
here.
a provocateur is not inherently.
No, but there becomes to be an entire infrastructure of activism that's built on that. And what you said there, the it's okay to be white posters were deliberately put up with the goal of being torn down. That was the point.
Yeah,
to show people where the bars on the cage are.
Yes. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the goal. It's to show people, right? That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, it is not necessarily
did and does and potentially will have a stranglehold on culture. And there's different ways to challenge that and being provocative. But yes. you're getting to the to something more institutionalized or aspirational.
Well, I'm doing something else.
Okay.
It does reveal that there is a certain sort of social sanction that comes out. But remember that and you see this in Homath a little bit. And you see it in Chase Strangio, and you see it in the 60s theorists, where it's everyone's been brainwashed by the system, right? Everyone's been culturally conditioned. That's why Homath recently has been talking about how he's building consciousness, right? He's creating consciousness. That's the exact same language that you find in like Stuart Ewan's Captains of Consciousness. It's exactly what you find out of the 60s counterculture. That's exactly what they saw themselves as doing. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And so there's a number of people on the dissident right who have, and I mean, you saw this in my debate with, speaking of Dave, he said, we will decide what public opinion will be. They really believe, as the counterculture did, that once they grab the control of the culture, they really do control the beliefs, opinions, and values of the masses at large. That appears to be Dave's view. And I got him wrong because I didn't think he actually thought that. And then when he said that to me 3 hours into our debate, I was like, you've been saying that this whole time. This is counterculture. And I was kind of unprepared for that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I was reading it and I was like, no, he's not really. Nobody is.
But the whole purpose that the classical liberal, 90 liberal, left me liberal, politically homeless liberal that has aspirations for elite status, Their whole aspiration is to create these alternative institutions that would pump out people according to a different regime of cultural awareness.
But what
it's the same. It's the same thing. It's a project.
Well, they're both projects, yes. But what I'm getting at is the underlying mechanism, which James Lindsay's trying to point at when he talks about woke, right? Which is namely that the idea is that everybody is being, that the values and beliefs of people are being shaped by forces they have no control over, and are essentially, they are at the mercy of whoever controls the culture.
James Lindsay calls everything an op. He's doing the same thing that, if that's the definition of woke, he's doing the same thing.
Hold on. He's trying to, I agree. I can't say I agree. I would say, yes, he calls many things an op. Yeah. I agree. But the point is the epistemological one, which is that people are having their values embedded into them, and that whoever controls the culture gets to brainwash the normies, right? That's the idea. That's the countercultural thinking.
That's the same thing that liberals want. Do you not see the connection between education and outcome?
Oh, hold on. But there's
are you a libertarian? Say like the reality will just appear magically, morality will just appear magically without any sort of institutional.
This is the same thing that I was attempting to do. Remember, the countercultural theorists were not necessarily in favor of education. The countercultural theorists thought that education was a brainwashing facility too. And so they wanted to create, that's why they had like open schooling where the teacher will be on the same level as the students and they will learn from each other in a collaborative environment, because they don't want people to be brainwashed. Yeah, Evergreen, Oberlin also, right? Mm-hmm. It's exactly that. That's exactly what they're after. So they're going to look at that and say, education is all just indoctrination too, right? That's fundamentally, any form of classical education is a form of indoctrination. That's what they're going to say, all of it. And this is, again, you see resonance of this on the woke right, dissident right, of when it comes to education and the policy and all these things, it's not whither but which, right? It's all indoctrination. Everyone's being indoctrinated. There is no neutral ground. It's just which set of values are people being indoctrinated into? And you don't think that that's the case? You think that there's just this neutrality, like reality that'll just appear if people go along with the status quo, or what? No. But I do think that there's an issue here.
Do you not want power? Do you not want your team to decide the exception on when authoritarianism needs to step in to save us from a crisis, right? Well, who controls the lever of powers? Or does power just not exist and it's inherently evil?
Power does exist.
Okay.
Power does exist. I'm going to get to that because you hinted at it when I talked about institutions.
Yes. Okay? And alternative institutions.
Yes, institutions and their alternatives. But right now what we're talking about is the ideal world of culture and ideas and thoughts and beliefs and all of that. Mm-hmm. Because according to the counterculture, that's where the action is. The institutions, I mean, even the Beatles in their, you say you'll change the Constitution. Well, we all want to change the world. You say you change the Constitution. Well, we all want to change your head. You tell me it's the institution. Well, you better free your mind instead. Mm-hmm. Institutional change is merely institutional. It's the transformation of consciousness that's sought. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. I have a few problems with this. First off, if we're all going to read John Ralston Saul's The Unconscious Society and think that everyone else is all brainwashed, I have a problem because everybody thinks that everyone else is brainwashed. Like the Robin DiAngelo thinks all of us are brainwashed. The dissident right thinks those people are over there are all brainwashed. There are certain conspiracy circles that thinks everyone's been brainwashed by the Israelis. So everybody thinks that everyone else has been brainwashed by nefarious features of the world or systems or structures.
Manipulation does occur, and propaganda has been studied and is deployed, whether we like it or not.
But everybody thinks that everyone else is propagandized except for themselves. Right? All of these views carry within them the idea that I am very special because I see through the propaganda. And I need to wake all of you up so that you can see through the propaganda like me. See?
But if you didn't assume you wouldn't be talking, you would have nothing to stand on to promulgate your insight.
I'm not assuming that anybody has been brainwashed by the system.
Well, you're assuming that people are assuming that they're brainwashed by the system. When we talk about the dissident right, I mean, I guess you see that pattern, but...
I'm not saying that public opinion can't be changed. I'm saying that they believe that public opinion can just simply be engineered.
If your team gets in control of the Department of Education, you have two choices, basically. You can reshape it in your image or disband it and let it reform according to somebody else's image.
Right. Okay.
So just being honest about the structures of power following from the authority of those in power, I don't see why that's an issue, or if it's not just realistic.
Because remember, the countercultural issue isn't about who controls the institutions. The countercultural critique was about the culture, right? And the way that the culture brainwashes people. Yeah? And so that's why they were opposed to most forms of formal education. People forget that a lot of ideas that have been adopted by the right in terms of things like homeschooling or vouchers and things like that actually started out on the left as an attempt to break apart what was seen as an oppressive structure. I mean, like, just think of like this oppressive structure that's like stomping out cookie cutter people. I mean, think about like the Pink Floyd video, Another Brick in the Wall, where kids are on a conveyor belt being like dumped into a giant meat grinder shaped like a schoolhouse, right? That's the view. Right?
Yeah, but the left is literally chopping off the genitals of children. They're literally grinding children. So what do you do?
Yes.
Do you reshape the education department in your image, or do you disband it and go your own way?
We're going to talk about that, but
I think you're underestimating the seriousness of the people on the right and their desire to not just meme their way into a promised land. There are shit posters, but people want institutional. Rufo is among them.
Yes. Okay. I work with Chris. I've worked with Chris quite a long time, so believe me. I do not think that. So let me. I'm gonna answer your question, but I want to make sure that I splice this down the middle. That I demarcate something. I'm splitting now. There's a difference between the sort of the right who is viewing themselves the way the progressives saw themselves in the early part of the 19th century, where they want to build new institutions that reflect their values and institutionalize a new set of values and ideas and a new set of norms on the one hand, and people who think that there needs to be a revolution in consciousness and culture before any of that is possible. If you look at a number of dissident right thinkers, the idea that the masses have been brainwashed by society and therefore need to be woken up is a common theme. It's happening all over the place. There's all sorts of countercultural activism that follows in that mold.
Are you saying that that's not happening? Look at the trans issue. So it is happening.
That's my favorite issue, to actually prove that it's not happening.
Okay.
I just wrote a piece about this. I don't buy the brainwashing thesis at all. I don't buy it for two reasons. First off, it's self-serving. Everyone's brainwashed but me. All of you people are brainwashed. You're all a bunch of lemmings running off the cliff unlike me. There's something I am extremely special going on. There was a woman, I can't remember her name, who wrote a critique of Paulo Freire's work. And one of the things that she pointed out is that all of the Freireans all think that everybody else is at the sort of mercy of the system, needs to be kind of shaken out of their stupor, except for them. They are the ones who are able to escape the conditioning and the social processes and all the rest of it to think for themselves. Everybody
that's a
else
human condition. That's endemic to humanity.
Everybody thinks of themselves this way. The second thing is that I think that the counterculturalists fail to realize what the role of institutional power is. This is part of the Rufo thing, right? Where we're not going to win through podcasts and memes and all the rest of it. We're going to win by building institutions. And we have to institutionalize our value, because power in a society, like, this is part of my critique of wokeness. Wokeness thought that power was a product of identity. You have whiteness, or you have heterosexual privilege, or blah, blah, blah. Power is held by individuals and institutions. Okay? That's where power is held. Mm-hmm. And so for those reasons, and this is where James Lindsay's trying to point at with the woke right and calling everything an op. I agree that it's wrong, but the part about
fits right into what you were just saying about everybody's brainwashed except for him. He's got a James Lindsay right jar. I mean, whatever. But
he's I mean, again,
if you talk about he's called everybody under the sun who doesn't agree with him, follow him to the letter woke right. So that term doesn't even make any sense to him. But if we talk about the dissident right, we have to talk about the Machiavellians. We have to talk about Yarvin, Land. You have to talk about Burnham, elite theory, populism.
I don't know. We don't. Elite theory, populism, a lot of that, and again, a lot of elite theory feeds into, it dovetails nicely with countercultural critique, because if you think that the people are, that you're going to decide what public opinion, well, who's the deciders? Well, it's the elite people who control culture and who have been able to embed the ruling class values.
Every organized system throughout time has been controlled by a small organized group of people. So
I am not claiming that there are not people who are elites who have power in society. That is not the claim I am making. I am making the claim that nobody is going to brainwash the masses or decide what public opinion will be. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples of that to break that. And then we can talk about the kind of what to do with education and institutional power. Okay. Beginning in about 2012, right up until 2022, was the most thorough propagandizing of a group of people probably in human history. Wes Yang has this term, the vertically integrated messaging apparatus, which is his kind of designation for the integration and walking lockstep of every sort of mass communication element of society, from social media companies to the education system, to social media managers of large corporations, to the HR managers within those corporations, to the diversity training within those
Yarvin calls that the cathedral.
The university system. That whole vertically integrated messaging apparatus, and that entire system pushed the whole trans kids thing as hard as anything has ever been pushed.
White privilege, the whole set of
all of it.
Ideas that we call
but I'm just saying trans specifically because we have good data on this. Okay. That idea never broke above 50%.
But which 50?
So what's going on? Mm-hmm. What's actually happening here? Is it that the masses are being brainwashed and that the elites are
50% is pretty good.
Well, I don't think that you're even hitting 50%. I don't think that issue ever, that the idea that children should be able to get genital surgeries, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers ever went above 50%, ever. I don't think it ever did.
Yeah, but if we're saying 50%, but that's pretty good. If you get 40% of people to believe that lie, that shows that you do have some sort of power. And it depends on which 40%. If those 40% happen to be the affluent people who run the society, then it doesn't really matter, right?
Right. Well, but here's the point that I'm making, and I'm going up against the countercultural theory on this, the brainwashing thesis. I'm going to knock that out, and then I'm going to talk about the institutional power. Okay. The idea has been that, so a lot of theorists, especially on the right, have said that conservative governments are unable to act because the public opinion is controlled by the vertically integrated messaging apparatus, and for that reason, it limits what conservative governments are able to do. So your conservative governments might want to do certain things or might say they'll do certain things, but when it actually comes down to doing it, they can't do it because you are restrained by public opinion if you want to get elected, right? I actually don't think that at any point people believed this.
Nobody believes that. Nobody even says that.
Sorry. Nobody says what? That conservative governments are restrained
by the people,
by what they can do by public opinion.
Not public opinion. It's always by the institution itself. If we're following the dissident right insights, it's the institution itself, the incentive structures within the system itself. Cthulhu always swims left. It's that vertically integrated cathedral that no matter what you throw at it, and put it a new face or a new leader, it will always reintegrate. The only way to move up within it is to become a part of it. The public opinion doesn't even matter. That's why the cathedral disdains the public.
I don't know that it doesn't matter. I don't know that it doesn't matter because if again in my conversation with Dave and my conversations with Oron, the idea that public opinion must be manipulated and that propaganda has to be enacted is considered to be a very important part of your system, because if public opinion didn't matter, there'd be no need for the propaganda.
Yeah, but that's not the reason why conservative leaders in government can't lead government.
No, but the idea is that if you are a conservative government and you ever enact any of these changes, the public will be instigated against you to immediately throw you out. And so that sets an edge on what you're capable of doing, that you can't ever get elected or maintain your position of power if you attempt to touch any of the progressive priorities and prerogatives. This is why, for example, if you look at like George W. Bush gets elected, how many of his socially conservative promises did he follow through on? Almost none. Even Reagan did amnesty. Why? Because it was the perception that this was widely popular and widely liked, and governments want to get reelected, right? And so there are certain things that you just can't do. Now, I think that the institutional thing that you just brought up there carries more sway, but I just want to point out that the propagandizing of the population for like a decade on this issue resulted in people rebelling against it hard. And it's now becoming the case where this is becoming a litmus test issue, where even the Democrats who are in hardcore in favor of it are trying to find ways to pivot and spin off of it. So this is the Graham Planter move, right? Where Planter says, when someone says, what do you think about men playing women's sports? He says, I just can't take it seriously. Back in my day, we had a girl on the football team. And it's like, he's trying to spin off by, yes, if a girl works hard and can elevate her game to meet up with the boys, yes, that's laudable. If a man works his way down and plays against girls and beats them, that's not. But he's trying to elide that difference. So Gavin Newsom showing up on Charlie Kirk's show, right? It's not that the culture has shifted. My theory on this is that there's been widespread preference falsification that's occurred. That people weren't brainwashed by the system. They were just afraid of the social sanctions. And why were they afraid of the social sanctions? It's because the institutional power belonged to the left. It's the institutions that actually make the difference. The control of the culture isn't actually the cultural theorists who believe that we need to transform the consciousness of the people, or that we need to wake people up, or say that other people have just been brainwashed by the post-war consensus, have actually got it wrong. That's not actually what's happening. What actually matters is whether or not people will very often defer to institutions on the basis of thinking that those institutions are run by experts who are at least attempting to engage in some sort of fair-minded adjudication of the process, and that those people aren't just there to assert their social and political dominance, right? I think I've done as good a job as anyone of showing that that's not true, that the institutions have been captured and hijacked. So I won't relitigate that point here.
Okay.
What has actually gone on is that what the cultural dominance of the left has allowed them to do is create the conditions under which you get widespread preference falsification. Now, will your audience be familiar with that concept, or should I explain it?
If you can do it briefly.
So briefly, preference falsification is when people perceive as a belief as being widely held, and that disagreement with that belief is carrying certain social consequences that are deleterious to themselves. And so people will keep quiet about that belief in order to avoid being stigmatized for not holding it. A paradigm case of this might be in the Soviet Union under communism. It came out afterwards that everybody thought communism was absolute garbage. Nobody bought it. But the perception was that it was popular because if you disagreed with it, you'd get arrested. Mm-hmm. Oh, now so your cat's there.
Yeah. He's
okay.
Tried to lock him out of the basement.
Oh, fantastic. Good kitty. Yeah, we loved a good kitty. Yeah, give some your. Yeah, he needs pets. She needs pets. So that's what's happening is that that there's widespread preference falsification. It wasn't that the system had been brainwashed and so that people were accepting this. The illusion of the popularity of trans issues was owing to preference falsification because the systems and the institutions which had the capacity to enact social sanctions were all owned by a single group.
And how did they get in control of that if not through cultural means?
Oh, well, excellent point. So I don't believe that they got control of it through controlling discourse. I think that they engaged in a long march through the institutions, and that long march through the institutions, the change in discourse followed the long march through the institutions, not vice versa.
Yeah, I don't see anybody on the DR that
work.
Disagrees with you there, if that's what we're arguing.
There's a laundry list of people who seem to think that the masses have been brainwashed by propaganda and that the elites control the propaganda apparatus which brainwashes people. And I'm saying the illusion, the prominence of certain things in the discourse are certainly a product of leftist control of institutions, but that didn't brainwash anybody. It just made people think that it just created the illusion of popularity so people would keep their heads down.
It brainwashed enough people. It didn't
actually change hearts or minds.
Enough did. If you said it never broke 50%, the trans kid issue, that's 45% is a lot, especially if it's the 45% that
I don't think it
run things. Like, you don't need the whole population.
At its peak after a decade, not only did it not break 100, not only did it not break through, but in the height of it was from 18 to 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Like it lasted a single election cycle. This is not a program that lasts for decades.
Okay.
You cannot control the culture and create legitimacy for yourself. Your legitimacy has to be tied to something deeper and something real.
Okay.
And that's where the conversation about neutrality comes in. Okay. That's the conversation about neutrality, because neutrality is not value neutrality or absolute neutrality or that all views are equal to all other views. That's not the idea. The idea is epistemic neutrality. That is, we don't put our finger on the scale. We don't predetermine the outcome before we bring our epistemological tools to bear on the problem. That is to say, what we're trying to do when we're looking at particular policies and ideas is to say, what does this policy do? And we don't put our finger on the scale and knock it down in order to favor ourselves. We don't predetermine an outcome. We don't accept the view that, how do I put this clearly? Actually, this is a nice way to bring it into Rawls.
Okay.
So now I'm gonna show what Rawls did. And I'm gonna show where
I think you would want to predetermine, if you're policy maker and you're analyzing policy, you would predetermine the outcome based on your assumed desire for a flourishing society to maximize human flourishing. You would put policy by definition is putting a finger on a scale. So I mean.
No. Again, when we're talking about neutrality, we're not talking like policies are not neutral because you're picking one policy instead of another. By definition, policy is not neutral. But we're talking about broad scale, large liberalism, and we're talking about marketplace of ideas thinking now, right?
Okay.
When we're talking about neutrality and we're talking about governmental neutrality, what we're talking about is the equal treatment of people, the equal application of process. We're not going to favor one group over another. We're not going to dole out outcomes based on the friend-enemy distinction. We're going to have a set of rules, right? And those rules are going to apply equally to everyone, is the idea. Okay? That's the idea. And we're not going to, again, on a liberal view, we're not engaging in friend-enemy politics where the rules are my friends benefit and my enemies suffer. That's not how liberalism operates, or that's the idea, right? Now, the critique from this is a different critique because I've done the countercultural thing to death now. I think I've and it's led us to here the question of value neutrality, right? Where we're going to say liberalism is going to make certain claims about neutrality, and the sort of dissident right types are going to say it's not whither but which. Everyone's imposing their values. Okay, So now I'm going to bring in Rawls is going to try and solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in order to get at what Rawls is doing, we're going to have to back up for a second, because Rawls sees that issue. He calls these comprehensive doctrines. So Islam is a comprehensive doctrine, and Christianity is a comprehensive doctrine, and, you know, wokeness is a comprehensive doctrine, and communism, right? That's comprehensive doctrines about life. Okay. Broadly speaking. And what Rawls is going to do is, here's Rawls' little trick that he's going to turn. Okay. He's going to say, how do we decide? What are we going to do? Now, Rawls is what we might call a liberal neo-Kantian. The liberal part is equality of opportunity, basic liberties for citizens. The neo-Kantian part of it is that his original position in Veil of Ignorance thinking is a procedural modern version of something like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative.
Mm-hmm.
It treats people as autonomous and to be free and equal. And then it's the priority of the right over the good. The principles of justice constrain what conceptions of good life people may pursue. So your perception of what a good life might be to kill people, but my right to life constrains the good life that you're able to pursue. So we determine what conceptions of good people can pursue by first ensconcing our rights, and then you can pursue your good within that, rather than asking what is a good life and doling out rights based upon what the good is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Rawls builds a very famous thought experiment on this. And what he says is he said, well, how do we know which rights people will have? Like, how do we decide what justice is? And so he does two things. First off, he says justice applies to the basic structure.
Of what? Society?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the institutional arrangements, the economic arrangements, the governmental arrangements. It's not everyone's individual outcomes. It's within a basic structure, right? So the systems of rights, the procedures of the legal system, the structure of government, the relationship of government to people, like the very basic structure of society. Okay? That's the first thing. So he's restraining it to the basic structure of society. And
Which
then
society?
well, that's what he's going to build. Now you say, okay, which society? That's exactly the question. And he says, well, what society are we going to build? And his idea is, he says, look, suppose we could take everybody, pluck them out of society, and put them behind a veil of ignorance where they don't know anything about where they're going to end up when this process is finished. Okay? You don't know what skin color you're going to have. You don't know what religion you're going to hold. You don't know where you're going to end up. Or, alternatively, you don't know where a white Christian male is going to wind up in that new society. You have no idea. Okay? You don't get to decide. Now, structure a society. And the idea, what Rawls is attempting to do with the veil of ignorance. So a lot of people have kind of tried to pick at this ontologically by saying, what would it mean to have somebody not know anything about themselves? Right? Or to say, how is it possible for me to be totally unaware of who I am or what my background is? Or people will say, look, I just am a product of my society. If you pulled any of my knowledge of that out, I would cease to be me. I think all of this is missing the point. And it strikes me as a little bit of like not knowing not being able to understand what it would be like for you to have had breakfast. Right? Like it's a bit of a failure of an imagination there.
No, I think it's taking into account that the ability to make hypotheticals precedes the hypothetical.
Sure, but all of those things are kind of refusal to engage the hypothetical, because you could set up the Rawlsian structure differently where it's when it's done, you don't know where you're going to end up. You're going to be dropped into a society with a new series of structures. And before you drop in, we're going to completely rearrange who has power, who has money, whether you're rich or poor, which groups are perceived to be at the top and at the bottom. We're going to reconfigure all of that while you're gone, while you're behind the veil of ignorance. So when you're dropped back in, you don't know where in the structure you're going to end up. It amounts to a very similar thing.
But it's assuming a structure.
Sure. And Rawls is going to say all societies have a structure. So we can assume that there's a structure because every society has one. And what Rawls is trying to do is to say, if you don't know where you're ending up, what is a rational person going to pick? That's what he's doing. Okay? And what he thinks is, or this is his view, is that the rational person is that these different people, these different kind of individuals behind the veil of ignorance will eventually have an overlapping consensus. Okay? That when you take the Christian or the Muslim or the Jew or blah, 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 and put them all behind the veil of ignorance, that they're going to come up with a set of principles that are ostensibly neutral, and that when they step out from behind the veil of ignorance, that all of the different groups are going to, for their own reasons, be able to have an overlapping consensus around these principles, which don't favor any one group explicitly. That's what he thinks.
Okay.
Now, you can disagree with him on that, but try and for a moment catch the bite of what he's saying here. Okay? Because I think a lot of people think, well, it's silly to think that people behave that and people don't operate that way and yada, yada, yada. But Rawls is, I think, because I believe he was a World War II vet, and I might be completely wrong, make an ass of myself for this, but I think that when Japan was being reconstructed and was being rebuilt after World War II, there was a whole lot of people who didn't know they were where it was going to get rid of the previous social system, right? Bushido was going away post-World War II. And people didn't know where they were going to end up. And so because of that, people were very hesitant to say my particular group or to advocate for certain unequal distributions of power or wealth or what have you, because they didn't know if they were going to end up getting the short end of the stick. And so what Rawls is after is saying, if you can't guarantee that you're not going to get the short end of the stick, if you don't know when you come out and after having make it that you're going to be the guy that gets screwed, how would you structure society? And what Rawls thinks is you'll structure society so that as few people as possible are getting screwed. That's what you're going to do. It's something like that. That's what he's attempting to do with his thought experiment. Okay? That's what he's after. Okay? That's what he's aiming at. And Rawls is leaning really heavily on grounding the stability of his system in shared agreement. Okay? Because what he thinks is he goes, look, you all disagree, and you guys disagree, and you disagree, and you disagree, and you disagree, but what can you agree on? What is it that you... So his idea of public reason is like this. What reasons are allowed in public debate? Well, it's the reasons and forms of reasoning that are common to all cultures. Well, not everyone agrees in the Quran and not everyone agrees in the Bible, but there are certain laws of logic and rules of reasoning that everyone can agree on. So, for example, everyone can agree on like 1 + 1 = 2. Everyone can agree on math. Everyone
Unless
can
you're
agree
a Harvard
on basic rules of logic.
Professor, I guess, but go on.
Well, we're going to come to that in a minute because we're going to have some objections to this. But he thinks you can get that. And then there's his overlapping consensus, which each group will have its own reasons for adopting the new theories. That's overlapping consensus. And then there's shared agreement by the people behind the veil of ignorance, right? There's going to be that overlapping set of agreements. And so this theory of you believe this and you believe that, and there's an overlap in the center and he believes that, so he overlaps in the center and he believes that, so there's some overlap there. He thinks that's going to ground the stability of the system. Right? And so what he's saying is, look, rather than pick any one form of the good, what we'll do is we'll pick a set of rights and a structure of government from the things that we have shared agreement on. And those rights and those ideas of shared agreement will constrain what conceptions of the good that people can pursue. And from there, you get a society that everyone can be involved in. That's what he thinks. Or that people can reasonably be involved in. Now, why does he adopt that approach? What's he doing? Well, he says at the start of A Theory of Justice that he was seeking a higher abstraction of the principles of justice in order to avoid sort of particularist perfectionism, which is the idea that if you say, well, Christianity will be the good, and then all of a sudden the ability of government to reach into people's lives just increases as people get ever more scrupulous about enforcing that Christianity and ever more specific. He thinks you get spirals of perfectionism, right? So if I wanted to explain this to people, in short, I would say something like this. If you go back to, say, before the American Constitution or any of that was formed, you had different countries, and a lot of them had their own state religions. And very often, nations or countries or territories were divided along religious lines, right? So you see this in Europe. You have French Catholics and, say, German Lutherans and British Anglicans and so on and so forth, right? With the Church of England and whatever. And those people are all fighting like dogs and cats. This form of Lutheranism is correct. No, it is Catholicism that is correct. And there are wars waged over this. But eventually what happens in Europe is they say, you eventually get Protestants willing to say, look, we're all Protestant. So instead of having the good or the comprehensive doctrine or the viewpoint that's enforced be specifically German Lutheranism, we abstract up and we go Protestantism.
Okay.
Then you have the Protestants and the Catholics are fighting, right? Like cats and dogs and going to war. And they can abstract up again and say, well, we're all Christians. And we can all live with each other because we're all Christians. And we can have sort of, we disagree within our culture. And then someone comes along and says, well, what about Jews? Okay, well, we're Christians, Jews, that's where you get Judeo-Christian from. We can graft the Jews in because they can close ranks around certain elements of the Old Testament, so we'll abstract up again. Then you add the Muslims. People say, well, how do you account for Muslims? Well, what if we just abstract up again to monotheism? And you just keep abstracting all the way up. And what Rawls is doing is saying, okay, we're abstracting up all the way, but we're still keeping one central thing around which that's the pillar that's holding everything together, right? And
which is what?
And Rawls is saying, no, we'll get rid of that and we'll just have the shared agreement. The shared agreement is what's going to hold it together. There is no central pillar that holds it together. It's the shared agreement that holds it together. And the incentives of human people. This is what he thinks. But just listen. He thinks that, look, there's going to be shared agreement because nobody wants war, because that's horrible. We've seen war in the 20th century, right? Remember, he's writing this after World War II, where everyone is coming home and saying, like, let's never do that again, okay? And in the wake of that, he's saying, look, everyone wants to avoid war, so what do? Well, we'll derive these principles of social justice using as much as we can our veil of ignorance theory to devise as neutral and abstract a set of principles that we can to govern our society, and we'll hold them in place by having people say, look, the Jews will never live under the Muslims, who will never live under the Protestants, who will never live under the Catholics, who will never live under the atheists. No one's willing to live under each other. So what can we all live with? Okay? Another way to say it is, look, excuse me, Mr. Jew and Mr. Christian, you guys are all fighting about what's the one thing we should center society around. Well, it's been several thousand years and you haven't solved it. So until then, we need a way to live together until you solve that problem. We need a way to live together. And because you're never going to solve that problem, our temporary solution in the meantime is actually going to be permanent. Okay? That's what Rawls is doing. Now, I think he's got a problem. And his problem is owing to his overlapping consensus. Because what happens when consensus stops overlapping? And Rawls doesn't have an answer to that. That's Rawls' problem. Because What happens when it's okay? So we have Lutherans and Anglicans and Pentecostals, and so then you have Catholics. And then okay, we get Jews, and they'll overlap a little less, but they're still there. And we can have some Aristotelians, and there's a little less overlap, but they're still there because they have the Thomists. And then you get Muslims, and there's a little less overlap. And then what happens when you get like postmodernism? It's like here, it doesn't overlap at all. Like the typical gender theorist has no ontological or epistemic beliefs that overlap with Protestant Christianity.
You could argue that they derive from them, but go on.
But I would say they deny a logos entirely, and Christianity is rooted in a logos. Okay, so they might have some shared interests every once in a while, but you don't actually get like this deeply held shared agreement where non-negotiables from each of these different comprehensive doctrines actually hold the thing together because everyone agrees on certain non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. What if there are no agreed upon non-negotiables? And in fact, what if my non-negotiables are in conflict with yours? Mm-hmm. And there can be no shared agreement? Rawls really doesn't have an answer to that.
That's there an answer to that?
Rawls' system. Rawls is assuming something, which I don't know that what Rawls is trying to circle around. If you abstract up, what are you doing if you abstract up? So we took like particular like Northern German Lutheranism. Then we abstract up to German Lutheranism. Then we extract up to Lutheranism. Then we extract up to like European Protestantism. Then to Protestantism. Then we can join with the Catholics and have Christianity. Then we can join with the Jews and have Judeo-Christianity. Then we can go up and we can get monotheism. And then we can, like, we're still trying to go up. But what's like the pillar that's the non-negotiable thing in the center, right? Because there has to be some immovable object that sits there that holds everything in place. Otherwise, what happens? There is no shared agreement. What's the thing that you need to have? And the answer to that, I think, is actually something that Aristotle noticed before any of the doctrines, which I'm talking about, had been fully formulated. And Aristotle said that there's a logos. There's a central principle of reason. And there's a central feature which, how do you say it? There's a divine principle of reasons around which the universe is ordered and structured and which gives it meaning and makes it intelligible. That's a bedrock assumption. Western civilization requires that assumption. Rawls gets rid of it.
Do other civilizations require that?
Ooh, that's a great question.
China?
I don't quite want to say yes.
Ancient China? Islam?
So that's a good question. I'm not prepared to answer that here. My suggestion is that the successful ones are assuming something like it, yes. Because you have to assume the intelligibility. You have to assume the intelligibility of the world in order to assume that truth is objective, and you need that in order to build power and great civilizations, right? Okay. It's just required.
Okay.
It's a precondition. So my point is where Rawls goes awry and where the postmoderns go awry is that they don't have a logos. That's their problem. So going back to my point about neutrality, when we talk about liberal neutrality, it's neutrality within something that is a constrained space, because you can't have like two non-overlapping comprehensive views be argued for. Because if one wins, if there's two non-overlapping views, mm-hmm. and government has to pick between one of them, then someone's losing and we're not neutral.
Yeah.
So there has to be some neutral epistemic space. And what could comprise of a neutral epistemic space? Well, you could never have a fully neutral epistemic space in some sense, but you could have the broadest possible neutral epistemic space by saying that our epistemic space is constrained by the logos. Okay? There are certain features of the logos which define the most broad and abstract principles which Western civilization can have. Mm-hmm. And if you assert that, then within that logocentric sort of thing, that logocentric set of principles, you can have no one putting their fingers on the scales. You can argue because you've restrained yourself to that logocentric world, right? Everyone has to accept that. Okay. And because that's the highest level of abstraction that you can go to. Now, it's not neutral because the logos itself, by asserting a logos and by allowing the logos to constrain, we've already restricted ourselves to policies, views, ideas, rights, and structures that are coherent with the logos. We've already done that, right?
Hmm.
But within that constrained, within that defined space, you can allow for disagreement and people to work things out, right? It defines the limits, right? So that shared agreement that we talked about before, where Rawls thought he could just have shared agreement and would just hold in place by people's incentives, and that's wrong. The shared agreement has to be around something like the Aristotelian logos, right? That's the highest level of abstraction that you can go. And anyone who's not willing to accept the legitimacy of the logos or restrain their conception of the good to such things that are compatible with the logos, that kind of view can be ruled out of bounds in
By
Western civilization.
Who gets to decide the exception?
Again,
the rule.
Again, that's a separate question. So the first question is the epistemic point, the conceptual point about what the logos is. The way that would be carried out is you'd have to have a set of institutions which are governed by and are structured by certain principles that are logocentric. So rationality, reason, evidence, truth, careful attention to the facts, so on and so forth. There'd be all of these canons that would be attending to a sort of logocentric worldview. So the postmodern conception of truth as relative would have no truck in an organization. So, for example, when postmodern gender theorists show up and say there is no fact of the matter about whether you're male or female, it's just up to you to decide subjectively, that gets ruled out of bounds by logocentric institutions, right? See, the mistake that people made was to think that you could have a structure of a social structure that's so abstract that it can accommodate any value at all, or any perception of the good at all, and that's not true. There are certain conceptions of the good that are going to be ruled out. Secondly, I almost lost you there for a second. The second point is that in terms of liberal tolerance, there is a small amount within a structure like that's held in place by a pillar like the logos, which is its immovable pillar, right? Within that structure, you can allow certain fringe beliefs to occur. There are people on the fringes of society who might reject a logos, and you could tolerate a small number of them, right? If a bunch of people develop postmodern views, you can't just deport them, because where do you deport them if they were born in America to American citizens? Where do you deport? You can't deport them. So you can tolerate them well enough, while still saying that our institutions will never be allowed to be run according to your view, because your view doesn't fit with the underlying foundational blocks of our civilization. Your views would destroy our civilization, so we just don't ever accept them. And so the values that get built into the institutions are broad and allow for broad disagreement between Christians and Jews and Muslims and monotheists, atheists, Aristotelians. There's a broad view, but there is a limit to what is able to be institutionalized. And all society has limits as to what can be institutionalized. It's not absolute neutrality of the sort that people kind of imagine. That's actually not what's going on.
I think logos is just too abstract. I think this is far up the pillar of abstraction that allows for you, but I don't think it's actually concrete. Could you name a society, even a business, that runs on such principles? Maybe a business would be easier to conceptualize, but a society is never. been built. I mean, maybe overtures to neutrality, like our Constitution, but it was built by and for people of a particularity. And logos is not particular enough for a nation, because you have people born in a nation. You have people defending the borders of a nation. You have people dying for a nation. I don't think people die for logos.
I don't know, man.
Unless you can concretize logos.
I'm not sure about that. What's the linchpin of Western civilization if not the logos? What's common to all of Western civilization if it isn't the logos? What would unite the Greeks and the Romans and say modern day America and 15th century Germany? I would say it's the logos is the thing that's lying at the
Roman
bottom of
Empire.
all
Was it fueled by logos, or was it fueled by power and a legal system that was adept enough at ruling over other cultures without too many entanglements? Right.
Sure. I'm not claiming that the Romans were self-consciously invoking the logos as the thing to which governed them. I'm not making that claim. It's not like they had a constitution which enshrined the logos. What I am saying is that if you look at what Rome was attempting to do and their justifications for things, they were consistently making the Greeks maybe more so, but there was continued, how can I say it, overtures toward and steps toward the idea that there was a set of objective truths, a set of objective goods, an objective way of, and I mean, again, the Roman Empire certainly became decadent and started falling apart, right? There's no question that I mean, that's one of the reasons that we have the good men make hard times meme, right? Good men make good times make good times.
And the Weimar Republic made Hitler.
The entire cycles.
So on and so forth.
Yeah. Right? Like, good times produce weak men produce bad times, bad times produce strong men produce good times produce, like that whole thing. Yeah. I'm not claiming any of that doesn't happen. What I am claiming is that if you look at the sort of the elements of Western civilization are drawn from Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem, right? Where definitely Western civilization pulls heavily from Rome. It definitely pulls heavily from ancient Greece, and it definitely pulls from Judaism and Christianity. Like, there's just no question that it does these things. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And what unites all of those, right? What's the philosophical thing that allows that what constrains the Roman power, legitimizes Greek philosophy, and is the linchpin of Christianity? It's the Logos, right? Christ is the Logos if you're a Christian, mm-hmm. right? In him, all things, that's what creates the universe, gives it order, structure, makes it beautiful, makes it, what would you say, interpretable and understandable. Mm-hmm. That's all coming out of the Logos, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the Greek philosophy, reliance on consent, our conception of the autonomous individual, the rational agent, is an extrapolation of this principle of the Logos. And therefore we can structure society, or that idea has created these successive structures.
Right. But what postmodernism did, and I think liberals allowed this to happen too, especially modern Rawlsian liberals, is they said, they used the Logos was the thing around which gave birth and created the possibility of the autonomous individual. Then they kept the autonomous individual and got rid of the Logos. Yeah. That's the cut flower politics. And I'm saying you have to have the Logos come back in. Okay. Now, I take your point that if you want the Logos to be able to be accessible to regular people, you have to concretize it, right? I take that point. And what was the concretization that most of Western civilization revolved around?
I
already said it.
You're going to do Christianity? I was going to do Superman, truth, justice, and the American way, but
I was going to say Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, but you take Christ away.
Superman's just the cartoon Christ figure.
But you can't put, according to your liberal, sorry to call you liberal, but according to your, insofar as you are liberalism, it bans you from promulgating Christ. You are too scared to take the reins of the Department of Education and say, no, we believe in the Logos now.
Oh, no. I'm not. I absolutely want to do that.
Okay.
The neutral principle is not all ideas are equal. That wouldn't be neutral. The principle of neutrality is that reality is the neutral ground, and the logos is the precondition that allows us to say that our minds are tethered to reality. Mm-hmm. And so it's the logos is the neutral ground. Okay?
If you're a philosopher, but if you're a politician, the neutral ground is what keeps you in office. I mean, right?
So this is again, but now what you're so again, you're moving. I'm saying here's the theoretical thing, and you're saying that theoretical thing runs into problems on the ground level.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's where you're going. And I tend to think that the way that those on the ground problems are, how can I say this? There is no way to obliterate the existence of wrongly structured incentives. If someone just wants to get elected so that they can start their career as an influencer, the AOC model, right? First you get elected, then you become an influencer, then you sell merch.
Well, or first you work with the CIA and then et cetera. But anyways, ... profit.
Or of the James Fishback model, right? You know, how many people have run a campaign, not because they want to win, but because it gets them followers online, and then they take off as an influencer. What's to prevent this? And the answer is that you can't ever abolish perverse incentives for humans. Of course, there's perverse incentives. That can't be obliterated. What we can do is, as best we can, ensconce rules and norms to in our institutions to constrain them, and then as best we can pass the tradition on to people in as much as we are able to. And we're not indoctrinating people, because indoctrinating is this what you have to believe. We're not going to let you believe anything else. But if we're educating people properly, what we're doing is we're giving them a proper understanding of why we're doing things and what happens if we don't do them. And if we've taught them well, then they'll be able to take that knowledge on for themselves and accept it authentically, rather than having it had selected for them. And I guess this is just what I believe because it was taught to me. We promulgate the views by giving people the agency to think, and then by providing for them genuinely persuasive arguments that are persuasive for the right reasons. That's different than I'm just ensconcing my views into people and then I'm stamping out people who agree with me. Like, that's critical pedagogy, right? We're just stamping out, activist, blue-haired harpy, sign holder, like, we're not doing that. You're genuinely trying to help people into understanding, and that's going to require adherence to truth and adherence to principles. Because if the logos does, and I think we can make an argument, I can't do it here because we're running out of time. But if I'm right about this, that the logos really does, that Western civilization was correct in thinking that the logos really does organize reality and structure it, make it knowable and interpretable. If I'm right about that, then
what is the logos going to do for young disaffected men who grew up in a culture that took all of their heritage, squandered it, and made them the enemies of the world? Well, how's logos going to reformulate the government so that they are given access to housing?
Right.
How's logos going to restrain infinite invasions and infinite importations of people from the third world? How's logos going to do any of this stuff? How are you going to package logos for the particular people who are trying to live their lives right now?
Yeah. So the question is, here's your logos up here, and you're saying, look, this is the principle of reason which makes the universe intelligible. Okay, but right now we have a really bad immigration policy which is destroying the country. So what do we do about that? So from a logocentric perspective, if we're going to say, okay, Rawls, you had a point about people needing to have a shared agreement, but you didn't give us a space of shared agreement. But we're going to take Rawls's point about basic structures of society being necessary. I think he got that right. We do need a basic structure. And we're going to simply point out that mass migration destroys the basic structure of society by rotting its institutions and destroying its norms. Okay? People who don't accept our logocentric way of thinking don't get to immigrate here. because our logocentric way of thinking and our logocentric institutions require to be run by people who accept them. And if you don't accept our way of our systems of merit, our epistemology of objective truth, and if you want to come here and say, I am here to impose upon all of you my single comprehensive doctrine of, say, radical Islam or jihadism or whatever, we're allowed to say no. And we're allowed to also say that it's not just a matter of one particular person's view, but accumulation of people who do not hold to our logocentric values, that do not hold to our concept of neutrality. We don't need to take them in en masse. You need to integrate yourself into our way of doing things here. We have systems of cooperation which are in operation, and those systems of cooperation are the very reason created the very conditions of desirability that made you immigrate here in the first place. And so therefore you must agree to accept those systems of cooperation and the principles that gave rise to them. And if you don't, we don't have to let you stay. We're allowed to kick you out if you don't accept those. So for example, radical Muslims who say we want to tear down your structures of cooperation because they are haram, we're allowed to look at those people and say, we can deport you for that, because you're not allowed to rot our basic structure. Now, what do you do with people who are, for example, American citizens who do that? Again, we can tolerate those people at the fringe, because where do you deport them? Are you going to force Russia to take them? Because Russia's going to turn around and say absolutely not. You can't force other people to take them. At a certain level, you're stuck with your citizenry. Mm-hmm. But you can say, we're going to, in order to be involved in our institutions, you have to accept certain features of our institutions and accept what would you say?
You'd have to say Christ is king, or is that a bridge too far?
The norms and rules which hold us together. Well, the problem with, and this is where I'm going to fight back against Dave and some of the others, is, and you're already beginning to see this on the right, the Catholic-Protestant divide, that fight is already starting to happen. Like the Catholic tribalism is already starting to rear itself, and so is the Protestant tribalism. Right? Like you see Protestant Christian nationalists saying, America must be Protestant. And you're seeing tradcaths say, no, we need to become Catholic. America needs to be more Catholic. And so
then there's the Orthodox.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is that
and the Judeo-Christians too. Don't forget them. They want the pie for themselves.
There are certain. Well, actually, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Depends on what you mean by Judeo, on which corner. But there are certain people who are within a Judeo-Christian milieu who want the Judeo-Christian thing to be the doctrine which everyone else must hold to. Right? That's a higher level of abstraction than just Catholic or just Protestant, but it still is its own comprehensive doctrine, to your point.
Does higher make something
it's slightly
better?
Having more abstraction allows for tolerate a greater number of groups. So the Judeo-Christians can tolerate both of the Christian nationalists and the tradcaths. Right?
And build the third temple at the same time.
But to your point, I don't know if the Judeo-Christians want to build the third temple. I think that's the Jews that want to build the third temple, and they'd like to build it in Israel.
The dispensationalists are on fire for it, but I'm agitating the internal fighting. So I'm just throwing salt on that particular fire. What if it is the case that only a certain level of intelligence is able to conceptualize and promulgate and then enforce this logocentric value system, and then you're going to have to deal with the stickiest wicket I think of in our time that I brought up with Homath is that you can have the retards and geniuses marching along, but how do you capture the midwits? Actually, how do you have your perverse incentive structures notwithstanding, how do you have your high ideals filter down through every rung of society? And for the lower end of the society, you're going to have comic books, and not by lower by idiots, it's by children. If you want to rear children in this way of thinking, you're going to need to have comic books and stories. You're going to need to have your Iliads, your Odysseys, and your Bible stories. And on the political level, there is a particularism where we're not just talking about widgets. And America is different than Britain, different than Hungary, different than Israel in a certain very important respect, but it was still founded by prominently Northwestern European people. And you take those people out of it, I don't think you're going to have America anymore. And so the young men who are seeing that should have the ability to say, okay, listen, we should have ours. This is our heritage. We should have a right to it. I mean, I understand them. I don't know how they're going to get from point A to point B. But I know that the universalist logos liberal system is not resonating with them because it's actually liquidating and betraying them.
I don't think it's my vision of logocentric liberalism, which is dissolving anything. I view that as a combination of the removal of the logos, both by Rawls and by postmodernism. Because the logos is the thing that says there's an objective set of principles which make the universe intelligible, and that those are knowable to us, and that they structure and order the universe. And that is what allows for objectivity. The removal of that removes objectivity and leaves us in a world of constructivism and subjectivity. And it's that constructivism and subjectivity which is at the root of all of the woke postmodern identity politics which have been run against white men for decades. As far back as like 1999, even back in 93, John Searle was writing about this. He was talking in the 90s about, he said that he's part Cherokee, his wife's a woman, and because their children are white males, they need to be discriminated against. So on an intersectional schema, his wife gets special treatment and he would get special treatment, but their children, for being white males, would be discriminated against. And just the utter absurdity of this. This has been pointed out by faithful liberals in the tradition for a very long time. But
liberalism did nothing to stop and shield the young men that are now rising up.
Yes, and that's true. And I think part of that is that, and this is another point Searle makes, is, and actually a point that was made by Brian McLaren, the Christian writer, who was an emergent church guy, that a lot of what postmodernism did was to attack the confidence of liberalism and its value structure. Say, really, this is all this talk of like Western civilization and particularly the logos, because that was what Derrida went after by name, right? Mm-hmm. He went after logocentrism by name. He was quite specific about that. And so was Judith Butler. She also went after the logos by name very intentionally. Ricky Wilchins did the same thing. All of the queer theorists were doing that. They were attacking logocentrism by name and doing so quite explicitly. Which name is and something St. Pierre, and like Joan Scott was in that. I would say Linda Nicholson probably in that too. Henry Giroux was in that. All of those postmodernists were attacking logocentrism quite explicitly. I mean, Derrida even thought it was male-centered, so it was phallo-logocentrism, right? I mean, just really explicit about going after that. And so they went after and said all this talk of a logos and objectivity and enlightenment, this is really just sort of a disguised power structure, a sort of disguised colonialism. And liberals allowed this to work. They then lost their confidence to be able to say, no, we're correct about certain things. It was an attack on the confidence of Western civilization. George Carlin once told a joke. I should get going quick because we've been talking a long time. But George Carlin once told this joke where he said, he wanted to invent a cockroach spray that didn't kill the roaches. It just filled them with self-doubt as to whether they were in the right house. That's what they were doing. They were trying to fill the defenders of Western liberalism and democracy and capitalism with self-doubt. That's what the game was. It was an attack on American confidence and Western confidence, and said, well, you're really just, I mean, it's Kennedy's disparityism, right? Every instance of racial disparity is automatically an instance of racism, of a structure which has as its goal to engage in the nefarious purpose of extracting extracting value from oppressed groups by imposing upon them costs in order to benefit other people or something like that, right? And that white men are being, again, Robin DiAngelo, brainwashed by the system, messages coming all the time to just be oppressors all the time, and that they need to be deconstructed. And all of their desires and goals and beliefs are all just a product of the system and are therefore illegitimate or whatever have you, right? This is an attack on Western confidence. And so liberals sort of farmed out their consciences and farmed out their beliefs. And I think all of Western civilization kind of farmed out their legitimacy to postmoderns and to whichever group was most oppressed so that they could sort of escape from the yoke of accusation on themselves, right? And the incessant reciting. I mean, one of the things that happens to academics, and Searle again pointed this out back in the 90s, is that they're defined almost by their timidity. Their unwillingness, like they're willing to say the controversial thing in a journal when it gets read by other people and responded to, but when you actually have people like at Evergreen show up and start scolding you face to face, a lot of academics really don't have the social skill set to deal with that. I mean, Brett Weinstein kind of did. He had the timidity to hold his ground and to see what was kind of going on. And when he said, history could turn in this hallway right here, I mean, it did, kind of.
For some of us.
Well, for a lot of us, because that was the moment that, like, that the Evergreen thing kicked off a lot. Mm-hmm. That Evergreen thing happened right at the time when James Lindsay did the with Helen Procrus did the grievance study fair. That kicked off like sort of the counter woke movement. So, but very few academics are able to recognize that in the moment on the spot and respond to it accordingly.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a heroic effort by Brett. And so it's very difficult then for the Western logocentric liberal like myself. It's been proven very difficult for them to be able to, what would you say, defend themselves, because they've had all of their confidence eroded and the ground on which they stand has been sort of as dissolved by cynicism and by sort of countercultural thinking where everything is just really sort of a disguised power structure or just the product of a cultural brainwashing or something else, and there is no legitimacy. It's all just who has power. That's all very real. That liberals went through that, but it's time, I think, to put that aside and to start giving it back to the postmoderns and saying, look, everything that you're saying about everybody else applies in equal measure to you. There's nobody who's power hungrier than a group of postmoderns who are always trying to dissolve everybody else's claim to power so that they can inherit it like a spoil of war. Yeah, they're always trying to inherit power for themselves, like it's like a spoiled brat who's just waiting for his grandma to die so he can get some money.
Well, they dissolved Western civilization. Reconquering Western civilization is another, or reclaiming Western civilization is another movement. And maybe it is the case that liberalism is downstream from a pair of cojones. Maybe the ability to reach for the logos comes down to a certain number of brain cells and T count. You know,
it's not that. It's not brain cells and T count. It's Aristotelian virtue ethics. It's the character of the person, right? That's why Aristotle had both the logos and his virtue ethics. Is you have to have a kind of character because you have to be willing. You have to have the strength of character to be able to say the true thing.
Yeah,
right.
Courage. Yeah, but courage isn't derived from. I don't know. Virtue is better is the highest ideal to aim for. The logos
pre-exists, but virtue. The logos pre-exists ontologically, but virtues are cultivated.
Yeah.
Like the expression of virtue in a person must be cultivated, right? You have to.
And that's why you want to lay claim to the Department of Education. That's your bid.
My bid to the Department of Education is to say, look, these virtues. If I inculcate the people the set of virtues, courage, strength of character, the willingness to bear responsibility. And to, like, I mean, tell me that's wrong. Who's going to push against that? A group of people that doesn't want anyone to stand up to themselves, right? And so I think that my claims to want to make changes in the Department of Education, or to get rid of it and just have a different kind of curriculum apply, just in general, is justifiable and defensible on reasonable grounds, and that the attacks on my ground, my reasons and justifications as being merely a mask for my own will to power, are simply bargain basement cynicism, which would fall apart under the first light of scrutiny. So now I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to have to call into this conversation.
Michael, Wokal, thank you so
enjoyed
much. It's been too long. I hope we can talk again. I absolutely adore our talks. Thank you so much.
So do I. It's more fun. Okay, you're going to hit the stop on the record button.
Yeah, let me hit the stop. There we go.